Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Late Friday night, no place I'd rather be than talking to Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss Rebels, continuing to stay aggressive in the transfer portal and landing the number one linebacker from this transfer portal cycle, Chris Paul Jr. from Arkansas. My favorite thing about this get is you're getting a player that you know can produce and play at a high level in the SEC. Chris Paul Jr., the last 2 years at Arkansas, 137 tackles, 15 tackles for a loss, 6 sacks. This is a guy that is just kind of a magnet to the football. When you watch Arkansas play, and there not a lot of great things happen for Arkansas this year, one of the bright spots on the defensive side of the football was Chris Paul Jr., a guy that really elevated this Arkansas defense and kind of made up for a lot of poor play in other areas of the field. What you're getting here is just a really experienced linebacker that's played a lot of football in the SEC, coming to Ole Miss. And you got to give Lane Kiffin a lot of credit back-to-back transfer portal cycles, landing veteran linebackers, right? Last year, you go out and get a guy like Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste, Monty Montgomery. The year before that, you go out and get a guy like Troy Brown from Central Michigan. The year before that, you go and get Chance Campbell from Maryland. And the veteran linebackers through the transfer portal has proven to be very successful for Ole Miss, and they go out and they get another one with Chris Paul Jr. Want to talk a little bit about Chris Paul Jr., how he fits in to this Ole Miss defense, and then talk about a couple other guys that Ole Miss is trending for on the transfer portal recruiting trail. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys, and this is an Ole Miss team that this time of year, we talk a lot of Ole Miss football because Lane Kiffin gets active in the transfer portal. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. A lot more updates coming your guys' way, and the support y'all have shown it means a lot. I really do appreciate it. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Chris Paul Jr. And what I'm so excited for in terms of getting a guy like Chris Paul Jr. into this Ole Miss defense is you take a look at what this defense looks like next year. You got your Mike linebacker and Chris Paul Jr. What does that allow a guy like Suntarine Perkins to do is be a little bit more of a freelancer, come off the edge, blitz the A-gap. Suntarine Perkins, I think, has one of the higher upsides in terms of defensive players in all of the SEC. And when you have a veteran linebacker like Chris Paul who can go sideline to sideline, fill holes, make a lot of tackles, it kind of frees up a guy like Suntarine Perkins to do a little freelancing, do a little off-script play where he's able to be an athlete and go impact the game. I really do think the Harold Perkins comp makes a lot of sense. Like, Suntarine Perkins is not just your average off-ball linebacker. He's a guy that can blitz off the edge. He's a guy that can kind of play that edge rusher position at times. But when you bring in a guy like Chris Paul, it's going to allow Suntarine Perkins to do a lot of different things. And a guy, as a true freshman, Suntarine Perkins looked absolutely awesome. I think you're really excited to see what this Ole Miss defense looks like with Suntarine Perkins going into year two, being a massive contributor for this Ole Miss defense. And I think one of the talking points that gets left out with this Ole Miss team, and we've kind of talked about a lot the last couple of weeks, this Ole Miss team under Lane Kiffin is consistently closing the gap since he's taken over in Oxford. And this year, you were 2 games away, on the road at Georgia, on the road at Alabama, for being an undefeated football team in 2024. And I get it. Like, it's 2 games, but those are the 2 top dogs in this SEC conference. We saw how much space there was between those 2 teams and the rest of the SEC. And what does that tell me for Ole Miss? They're right there, and they're continuing to close the gap. And I think a large part of this gap closing, yeah, you know Ole Miss's offense, when Lane Kiffin's here, is going to be great. But what they've done consistently the last couple of years is improve this defense. And you look at this defense in 2023, and we said it a couple days ago when we were previewing the Ole Miss transfer portal. I'll say it again. It looks like an SEC defense. As opposed to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it really didn't. And a guy like Chris Paul Jr., an all-conference linebacker at the SEC level, is just going to continue to make that front seven improve even more. Want to talk about a few other guys that are visiting South Carolina or visiting Ole Miss that you're really excited for. Said South Carolina because we're going and talking about the South Carolina wide receiver Antoine Juice Wells. And this is a guy that he's the best wide receiver in the transfer portal class. And he's a guy, you look at Ole Miss and their pitch to wide receivers in the transfer portal, look no further than a guy like Trey Harris, who comes in from Louisiana Tech and has a phenomenal year vaulting up his draft stock. Juice Wells sees someone like Chris Harris have all that success and look at the wide receivers in this Ole Miss offense that have historically had success at Ole Miss and said, this is a spot where I can go. I'm going to get a lot of work. I'm going to be a centerpiece in this offense. The selling point for Juice Wells, this Ole Miss offense sells itself, and he was supposed to go to Texas this weekend, cancels that visit, going to be focused on his time at Oxford this weekend. Lane Kiffin, one of the better recruiters, and when it comes to closing on these kind of guys, getting a full 48 hours with Juice Wells in Oxford, Mississippi, would not be surprised if we're talking Sunday afternoon about a commitment from Juice Wells through the transfer portal. Again, a guy that 6 months ago, heading into this season, I was saying he's the best wide receiver in the SEC. A guy that can do everything, stretch the field vertically, be very, very good after the catch, would be the wide receiver one in this Ole Miss offense. And if Juice Wells ends up in Oxford, I think Ole Miss fans have a lot to be excited for. Another couple guys want to talk about really quick, and one that we didn't cover in the transfer portal preview for Ole Miss that I'm still kind of intrigued with, and it sounds like Ole Miss is making some traction and making some moves here. Andrew Makuba, the safety from Clemson. This is a top 10 guy in the transfer portal, the number one safety in the portal, garnering a lot of attention, right? Texas, Oregon, USC. He's going to be, it sounds like at least, going to be stopping by Ole Miss in the campus and continuing to say and kind of talk about why Ole Miss is taking these steps in the right direction. It's the defense, and the defense getting massively better the last couple of years. Lane Kiffin did a phenomenal job in the transfer portal with those defensive backs. Guys like Zamari Walton, John Sanders came in and played very, very good football. Andrew Makuba, I mean, he's a guy that probably goes day 2 in the NFL draft had he not entered the transfer portal. That's how good Andrew Makuba is. That's how college coaches value him. Because you see him hit the portal. I mean, every Power 5 team in the country is getting in contact with a kid like Andrew Makuba. If Ole Miss can pull this one off, I mean, again, we're talking about a team that's going to look a lot better in 2024 than they did in 2023. Last guy I want to talk about, and again, one of the bigger targets, and not as flashy as a guy like Juice Wells, or not as flashy as a guy like Andrew Makuba, but what would be a massive addition to this Ole Miss team, and that is Carter Smith, going to be on campus this weekend. You're talking about a 12-game starter at Indiana. As a Michigan fan, I've seen a lot of Carter Smith. He's a very solid tackle. And in this day and age in the transfer portal, you can get a lot of talent at a lot of different positions. Getting talent and starting caliber talent at the offensive tackle position is extremely difficult. Carter Smith is one of those starting caliber offensive tackles that's available in the transfer portal. We talked about him a little earlier this week. 300-plus pass pro snaps, only gave up 15 pressures. And Carter Smith could be a guy that if you're graduating losing some guys on this offensive line, Carter Smith's a guy that can come in and start right away for this Ole Miss team. I think that's how good he is. He was a top 200 guy coming out of high school. We're talking about some guys that these aren't projections anymore. These are guys that are very interested in Ole Miss, will be on campus at some point in the next 10 days. If Ole Miss can land a few of these guys we just talked about, and we're talking about a team that's going to be continuing to get better in the transfer portal. We know we're going to be talking a lot of Ole Miss football late Friday night. Had to hop on, talk a little bit about the number one linebacker in the transfer portal heading to Oxford. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Again, if you do enjoy the content and enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.